Little volume. There we go. Now we have a little volume. I need all the volume I can get today. Okay, we're into Nehemiah chapter 9. I changed my background. Now I have a wall there. Before I had a foundation. So since it's been built, changed the background, made it a little different. This is a prayer to God by the Levites. And that's pretty much the whole chapter. But I think there's some things that we can pull out from that one. If you notice, I've got a cold, so being this far away from everybody is good. So let's jump into it. Nehemiah 9, first chapter, first verse. Now on the 24th day of this month, the sons of Israel assembled with fasting, in sackcloth, and with dirt upon them. So what month is this month in the Jewish calendar? And what's significant about this month? And I'm probably going to get stares. But we ought to remember what month it is. The 7th month, which is kind of odd. And the reason it's odd is because in the 7th month of the Jewish calendar is Rosh Hashanah. Anybody know what Rosh Hashanah is? Jewish New Year. It's in the middle of their month, the middle of their 12 months of the year is Rosh Hashanah. But there's other things in the 7th month of the year. Go back to Leviticus. We study Leviticus so much, right? We never study Leviticus. Leviticus, when you reap the harvest of your land, moreover, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor gather the gleaning of your harvest. You are to leave them for the needy and the alien. I am the Lord your God. Again, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a rest, a reminder by blowing trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work, but you shall present an offering by fire to the Lord. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, on the 10th day of the 7th month, so this is the one on the 1st day, the one on the 10th day, is the Day of Atonement. It shall be a holy convocation for you, and you shall humble your souls and present an offering by fire to the Lord. You shall not do any work on the same day, for it is a day of atonement, to make atonement on your behalf before the Lord your God. If there is any person who will not humble himself on this day, he shall be cut off from his people. As for any person who does any work on the same day, that person I will destroy from among his people. You shall do no work at all. It is to be a perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwelling places. It is a Sabbath of complete rest to you. And you shall humble your souls on the 9th of the month at evening. From the evening, on evening you shall keep the Sabbath. Again the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, on the 15th of the 7th month is the Feast of Booths, for the 7 days of the Lord. On the 1st day is the holy convocation. You should do no laborious work of any kind. For 7 days you shall present an offering by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall make a holy convocation and present an offering by fire to the Lord. It is an assembly. You shall do no laborious work. So we've gone through and we've seen something on the 1st, the 10th, the 15th, and it's also Rosh Hashanah in the 7th month of the Jewish calendar. A little bit more. On exactly the 15th day of the 7th month, you have gathered the crops of the land. You shall celebrate the feast of the Lord for 7 days, with a rest on the 1st day and a rest on the 8th day. Now on the 1st day, you shall take for yourselves the foliage of beautiful trees, palm branches, and boughs of leafy trees, and willows of brook, and shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Last week, Doug, I think you talked about at least one of these. I think it was this one. So they had both of these. They had two of them they were celebrating. But the Day of Atonement and the New Year, didn't see that. Did you see that in there? No. No. Okay, so they were missing two. Going on in Leviticus, you thus shall celebrate it as a feast for the Lord for 7 days in the year. It shall be a perpetual statute throughout your generations. You shall celebrate in the 7th month. You shall live in booths for 7 days. All the native born in Israel shall live in booths. so that your generations may know that I had the sons of Israel live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So Moses declared the sons of Israel the appointed times of the Lord. So what significant events occurs in the 7th month? It's Tishri. There's 4. Rosh Hashanah, Festival of Booths, Day of Atonement, and the one where you're supposed to leave the crops. That's the first day of the month, of the 7th month, and you leave things in the corners. So you have 4 things that they're supposed to celebrate. Back to looking at verse 1. They're fasting, they're in sackcloth, dirt. Why might they be in sackcloth and dirt? I know you're out there because you're looking at me. Why did you wear sackcloth and dirt? Why would you do that?
Is it not the ultimate expression of humility?
Humility, we have really been wrong. I mean, these verses that I read out of are out of Leviticus, okay? And I've got to apologize to Doug. Last week I said it might have been just Deuteronomy and Leviticus. When they read from the books of the Old Testament, I think they read a bunch of them. And you're going to kind of see it here, I think. What hadn't they been doing? It said several of these were to be something you did every year. It's you need to do this every year. And they hadn't been doing it, had they? They hadn't been doing this probably before they went into captivity into Babylon. So it's probably been 200 plus years since they've done this. So they had the law read, and we're going to go into a little bit more of what they did there that they knew that they did wrong. But these festivals that God had said, you need to celebrate these festivals. The Day of Atonement is a big deal. Why? That's the one day of the year when all your sins get forgiven, right? And they hadn't done that. It's a big deal. The descendants of Israel separated themselves from all foreigners, so they hadn't done that. Now they've done it formally, and stood and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their fathers. They stood in their place. They read from the book of the law of the Lord, their God, for a fourth of the day. And for another fourth, they confessed and worshiped the Lord, their God. Now the Levites' platform stood, Jeshua, Benai, Kadmiel, Shebaniah, Benai, Sherebiah, Benai, 2 Benais, Chennai, and they cried with a loud voice to the Lord their God. So how well did they embrace what God was saying? Don't give a Chuck answer. They embraced it totally, didn't they? They said, they didn't just hear it, they reacted to it. They said, we've really been ignoring God. And God brought us out of captivity. Brought us out of captivity more than once. He did it in Egypt. He did it in Babylon. And he's going to do it during times of the Romans. And that's the big captivity that he's going to take all of us out of. Then the Levites, Jeshua, different set of Levites, Kadmiel, Benai, Ashbaniah, Sherebiah, Hodiah, Shebaniah, and Pethiah said, Arise, bless the Lord your God forever and ever. Oh, may your glorious name be blessed and exalted above all blessing and praise. You alone are the Lord. You have made the heavens of the heavens, with all their host, the earth and all that is in it, the seas and all is in them. You give life to all of them, and the heavenly host bows down before you. So what part of scriptures are these Levites referring to here? Huh?
The creation.
Yeah, it was what book? Genesis, yeah. So they're talking right now out of Genesis. This is why I think they read a whole bunch of books on the last reading we talked about in the last chapter. It's because this is out of Genesis. You are the Lord who chose Abram and brought him out from Ur of the Chaldees and gave him the name Abraham. You found his heart faithful before you. You made a covenant with him to give him the land of the Canaanite, of the Hittite, of the Amorite, of the Pezerite, of the Jebusite, of the Girgashite, to give it to his descendants, and you have fulfilled your promise, for you are righteous. So what scripture is he referring to here? What book?
That's still Genesis. Isn't it?
Exodus.
Yeah.
It's Exodus. It's when they took the land. The promise was there, but he said, you gave him this land.
But it's the promise.
So it's the promise. It's Genesis and Exodus. The promise was made in Genesis. The execution of the promise was done in Exodus when they left. And Joshua. Was it also in Samuel or just Joshua?
Joshua's where they really take the land.
Yeah. So you have 3 books at least that it's spread out over. What promises do they appear to be forgetting? There's only 3.
That everybody would be blessed through them, through Jesus.
That's one. What's the other one? What do you think, Brent? I'm going to start calling names.
that they would cover the whole world.
Yeah, they had as many people. He had many descendants as there are sands by the sea, as there are stars in the heaven. That was the other one. So, but they do come around back to it. You saw the affliction of our fathers in Egypt and heard their cry by this Red Sea. Then you performed signs and wonders against Pharaoh, against all his servants, and all the people of his land. For you knew that they acted arrogantly towards them, and made a name for yourself, as it is this day. You divided the sea before them, so they passed through the midst of the sea on dry land. And their pursuers you hurled into the depths, like a stone into raging waters. And with a pillar of cloud you led them day by day, and with a pillar of fire by night, to light them the way in which they were to go. It's a pretty easy one. Which one's this? Exodus. Okay? This is when they came up to the Red Sea and said, you brought us out here to all get killed, remember? You led us out of Egypt, and they're going to just slaughter us. And it looked like it. But what the miracle was the parting of the Red Sea. You kind of see some things where people are trying to explain it like a big wind came. But the big thing about it was, when the waters parted, what was the ground like? It was dry ground. It was solid. Have you ever been on the bottom of a lake or sea? You ever felt it? It's squishy. You know, you couldn't bring horses and wagons across if it just parted and it was just the wet ground. But it was bone dry, where you could move across it. Then you came down to Mount Sinai and spoke with them from heaven. You gave them just ordinances and true laws, good statutes and commandments. So you made known to them your holy Sabbath and laid down for them commandments, statutes, and law, through your servant Moses. Which one's this from? Which book? Exodus. And if there were other laws and ordinances and everything like that, it would have been, we're also in Exodus, but also Leviticus and Deuteronomy, where he gave them all the laws, all the ordinances, everything else that they had. So it's kind of spread out. What events did they seem to leave out? What happened when it came down off Mount Sinai? Yep. Yeah, remember how that calf just jumped out of the fire in gold? That's what Aaron said. He said, I don't know. We just threw this in there and it just jumped out. They didn't leave it out. You provided bread from heaven for them for their hunger. You brought forth water from a rock for them for their thirst. And you told them to enter in order to possess the land which you swore to give them. But they, our fathers, acted arrogantly. They became stubborn and would not listen to your commandments. They refused to listen and did not remember your wondrous deeds that you had performed among them. So they became stubborn and appointed a leader to return to their slavery in Egypt. Which event do you think this was? I had two that came to mind. One of them was wrong. You better remember the rebellion of Korah. Korah. Korah is the one who led an insurrection with about 245 guys against them. The other one was where they just said, okay, we came to the land, we spied it out, we need to go back to Egypt. We can't take this. I believe that's the one that's probably the appropriate one. This is out of Numbers, another book that we study a lot. Then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And this is after all the spies had come back from going into the land. And remember, they brought back food, and they brought back like a stalk of grapes, and barely two men could carry it because it was a land flowing with milk and honey. All the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Would it be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces in the presence of all the assembly of the congregation of the sons of Israel. Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, of those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. I believe that's what it was referring to. So again, you see, another book they had to have read was Numbers. But you are a God of forgiveness, back to Nehemiah. But you are a God of forgiveness, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in loving kindness. You did not forsake them, even when they made for themselves a calf of golden metal and said, this is your God who brought you up out of Egypt, from Egypt, and committed great blasphemies. You, in your great compassion, did not forsake them in the wilderness. The pillar of cloud did not leave them by day to guide them on their way, nor did the pillar of fire by night to light them the way in which they were to go. You gave your good spirit to instruct them. Your manna you did not withhold from their mouth, and you gave them water for their thirst. Indeed, 40 years we provided them in the wilderness, and they were not in want. Their clothes did not wear out, nor did their feet swell. Scripture this is referring to? Still Exodus. 40 years of wandering in the wilderness is still Exodus. But it's kind of interesting that, what he puts in here is he has a synopsis of all the things that God did, even in spite of what they did. You can kind of see the thread that the Levites are saying as they go through and they quote all the things that God has done for them. We're getting close. You guys need to talk. I was expecting you to talk more. You also gave them kingdoms and peoples, and allotted to them as a boundary. They took possession of the land of Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and the land of Og, the king of Bashan. What's this? Oops. What's this? What was this event? When did it happen?
You're still looking at pre-Canaan, so probably
Yep.
some of the lands they're walking in, I'm gonna say Moab, but something tells me that you're also looking at Lebanon or something.
Lebanon way up on the coast
Yeah.
of the Med. And Moab is in the southeast border of what would become Israel. So you're close. Oh, you've gone farther north now. Who lived? I'll ask questions since he asked that one. Who were the descendants? Whose descendants lived in Edom? Anybody know? Esau. And it's above Moab. This is the reference here in Numbers. Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites. So, this is Amorites. Where's that located? It's definitely not in the west, because the Mediterranean Sea is on the west. On the east, I already talked about Moab, and you have Edom, and you have a couple of the other countries that are on there. Is it to the north or the south? Probably the south. It's the south. Which way did they come up to Israel? From Egypt. From the south. So it has to be the south. Let me pass through your land. So they wanted to pass through the land to go where? The land that was promised to them. That was their path that they were going to take. We will not turn off into the field or vineyard. We will not drink water from the wells. We will go by the king's highway until we have passed through your border. But Sihon would not permit Israel to pass through this border. So Sihon gathered all his people and went out against Israel in the wilderness. And they came to Jahaz and fought against Israel. Then Israel struck him with the edge of the sword and took possession of his land from the Arnon to the Jabbok, as far as the sons of Ammon. For the border of the sons of Ammon was Jazer. Israel took all these cities, and Israel lived in the cities of the Amorites and the Heshbon, and all her villages. For Heshbon was the city of Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab, and taken all his land out of his hand as far as Arnon. So you have Moab that's off to the east of Ammon. He had fought to take that. But this is what he's talking about it as far as what God had done. It was before, should they have won that battle when they went against the king of Sihon? No. It should have been a precursor before they got to the land promised. But what stopped them when they got into the land that was promised? What was the biggest thing that they said, no way we could take it? You remember? Saw some lips moving, but I couldn't hear anything. Huh?
They're too big.
They were big. Okay. Said, we're like grasshoppers, these guys. They're huge. And they were. They were, from their perspective, they were enormous. It'd be like, I don't know what the average height of the people were at that particular time, but it might have been around 5 feet. These guys were like 6 or 7 feet. They were huge. You made their sons numerous as the stars of heaven, and you brought them into the land which you had told their fathers to enter and possess. So their sons entered and possessed the land, and you subdued them, and you subdued before them the inhabitants of the land of the Canaanites. You gave them into their hand with their kings and the peoples of the land, to do with them as they desired. They captured 45 cities and a fertile land. They took possession of houses full of every good thing, hewn cisterns, vineyards, olive groves, fruit trees in abundance. So they ate, were filled, and grew fat, and reveled in your great goodness. What promise is being recounted here? And I've got an S next to the promise.
One about their sons being numerous as the stars.
Right. Sun, being numerous, stars.
And
That's
they
one.
gotten the land of Canaan.
And they got the land. This is after they'd been wandering for 40 years, and they came back and started to take the land of Canaan. So they're recounting both of those promises. So they got 2 out of 3. But they became disobedient and rebelled against you, and cast your law behind their backs, and killed your prophets who had admonished them, so they might return to you, and they committed great blasphemies. Therefore you delivered them into the hand of their oppressors, who oppressed them. But when they cried to you in their time of distress, you heard from heaven, and according to your great compassion, you gave them deliverers, who delivered them from the hand of their oppressors. But as soon as they had rest, they did evil against before you. Therefore you abandoned them to their enemies, so they ruled over them. When they cried out again to you, you heard from heaven, and many times you rescued them according to your compassion. What book is this? One of Doug's favorites.
Sounds like Judges.
It's Judges. This is all about Judges. Remember in Judges, people would ignore God and go off, do their own thing. One of the people from different lands, God would say, okay, I'm not going to protect you. They're going to come in, they're going to take you over. And they're going to cry and cry and cry, and he sends a judge. And the judge throws them off, and they get all say, we're going to keep your commandments, God. We're faithful to you. And it was a cycle all the way through Judges. They'd come back, they'd pledge what they were going to do, then they'd go off and do their own thing, then they'd go off and get captured, then they'd cry, he'd send a judge, and it was a cycle. And you got that all the way through the book of Judges. And admonish them in order to turn them back to your law. Yet they acted arrogantly and did not listen to your commandments, but sinned against your ordinance. But if a man observes them, he shall live. And they turned a stubborn shoulder and stiffened their neck and would not listen. However, you bore with them for many years and admonished them by your Spirit through your prophets. Yet they would not give ear. Therefore, you gave them into the hand of the peoples of the lands. Nevertheless, in your great compassion, you did not make an end of them or forsake them, for you are gracious and compassionate God. What part of Scripture here? Who was the first to go into captivity, Israel or Judah? Israel, okay, to the Assyrians. That kind of, they had gone quite far away from God. Remember, they put up their own statues, calf statues in Dan and Bethel. Said, we'll worship God here because that's our God. So they came worse. But Judah, who took them into captivity? You remember? The golden head in the statue. Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. He took them into captivity. What book do we have that indicates how God was still with them in the Babylonian captivity? My favorite book to teach. The book of Daniel. Daniel rises to be number 2 in the nation of Babylon, or Babylonia, underneath Nebuchadnezzar. And you see God's hand with them, even when they're in that captivity, underneath Nebuchadnezzar. And it carries through. It goes to the Babylonian captivity and goes into the Persian captivity. Because when Daniel gets thrown in the lion's den, who's king? Remember? It's a co-leadership. Cyrus the Great and Darius. Darius is a Mede. Cyrus the Great is a Persian. So it was the Mede-Persian Empire. And even then, God was protecting Daniel. And God was with the people who were faithful to him. Last verse. We're going to get done early. Now therefore, O God, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who keeps covenant and loving kindness, do not let all the hardship seem insignificant before you, which has come upon us, our kings, our princes, our priests, our prophets, our fathers, and on all your people, from the days of the kings of Assyria to this day. However, you are just in all that has come upon us, for you have dealt faithfully, but we have acted wickedly. For our kings and our leaders and our priests and our fathers have not kept your law, or paid attention to your commandments and your admonitions, with which you have admonished them. But they in their own kingdom, with your great goodness, which you gave them, with the broad and the rich land which you set before them, did not serve you or turn from their evil deeds. This one. This covers a whole bunch of books. This kind of covers the history coming up from once they got in the land, took the land, and then it split between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and then being taken into captivity, first by Assyria in the northern kingdom, and then by Babylonia in the southern kingdom. And how they had gotten in that way was because they were stubborn and they were wicked. They didn't follow God, even though God gave them everything that they needed and more. So he's really talking about several books there. Behold, we are slaves today, and as the land which you gave our fathers to eat of its fruit and its bounty, behold, we are slaves in it. Its abundant produce is for the kings whom you have sent over us because of our sins. They also rule over our bodies and over our cattle as they please. So we are in great distress. Now, because of this, we are making an agreement in writing, and on the sealed document are the names of our leaders, our Levites, and our priests. What are they asking for God? All the way through that they had in this prayer, what did they ask for?
Seems like they're asking for mercy and forgiveness for all the stuff that they did.
Yeah. They're recognizing God's mercy and forgiveness at least. When I went through it a couple times, they didn't ask him for anything. Because they went through and said, here's all the stuff you delivered to us. Here's all the faithfulness you've had to us. Here's all of the compassion you've had to us. This is a response to what God's done for them. And they turn their nose up at it over centuries. And that's what these people are coming to the conclusion to say, we're still slaves. Who are they slaves to? What kingdom's reigning at this particular time?
Slaves to their own kings, slaves to the Persians at this time, right?
Huh?
You're slaves to the Persians right now.
Yep. It's the Persians. Okay. Artaxerxes is the king now. It's going to go to Artaxerxes and then Darius too, and then Artaxerxes too. Okay. But it's the Persian kingdom at this particular time. They're still underneath the control of the Persians. They are not a separate kingdom. Matter of fact, remember, in the other ones, all the people that were around them, whether it was to the north, the east, or the south, they got together, Gershom, Tobias, and Sanballat got together and said, hey, we're going to tell the king that you're going to make your own kingdom, your own king. You're going to crown yourself. You're going to rebel against the kingdom, which they never intended to do. Okay, so they are a people that are in right now slavery. They're under the control of the Persian kingdom. They're going to stay under the control of a foreign kingdom. When the Persian kingdom goes away, what's the next kingdom? The Greeks, okay? The next kingdom is going to be established as the Greek, where Alexander the Great goes through and captures as far over in the east as India. And then when he dies, his four kings are going to split up the kingdom. And you're going to have the Ptolemies to the south, and you're going to have the region that they're in that is going to be underneath the control of it was Antiochus. I forget what the empire was, but you're going to have them underneath their control until they finally throw off that control with rebellion by the Maccabees. And that's where they celebrate Hanukkah, is because Israel for a time became an independent kingdom. So you have all this going on. It's going to go on for quite a while, isn't it? I mean, I just went through the Persian kingdom, the Greek kingdom, the end of the Greek kingdom, before you came into the Roman kingdom. And it's not going to be very long that they're going to be an independent kingdom, because the Romans are going to come along and says, well, we had enough of that. And they put them under control again. So you can kind of say where they're at right now is they're kind of be in this state until Christ comes, more or less. They're going to have some of that independence for a little while, but it's not going to last. And then they're going to stay in that particular state. And they're going to stay in that mindset of rebellion all the time. You had the 4 types of people that were in the kingdom as far as the kingdom of Rome. If you remember, you had the Pharisees, the Sadducees, we hear about all the time. You had the Essenes, who were just kind of, they were a religious kind of cult group. And you had the Zealots. And the Zealots were the ones who wanted to rebel against the Roman kingdom. So you had those 4 that came up. So the Zealots were always there. Zealots for Israel to be an independent state has always been there as long as they were in captivity, whatever captivity it was. So that's kind of a synopsis to bring us into the next one. Nehemiah 10 goes into more discussion as far as them moving forward and what they're going to do with God, and that's what Doug's going to talk about next week. Comments, questions? Hope you enjoyed the history lesson too. Thank you.